Russia is losing in Ukraine. And we don't just mean the war, Russia is losing itself. As over 1,000 soldiers die every single day, shocking statistics are now being exposed that show us two things. Putin's army is bleeding out. Russia itself won't recover for 100 years after Ukraine is over. Putin's folly has been exposed as his soldiers die in numbers nobody ever expected. For Russia, the future looks far bleaker now than it ever did before Putin invaded. It all starts with the sharp rising casualties that Russia has been experiencing in recent months. According to the Financial Times, both Ukrainian and European officials say that more of Russia's soldiers being killed or are going missing in action than ever before, which has the knock-on effect of making every Russian offensive that follows weaker than the one that came before. Over the long term, Russia is putting itself in a position where the entire country will be on the verge of collapse over the next few decades, but we'll get to that. First, let's look at the numbers to see if they are as bad as the Financial Times claims. Spoiler, they are. In February, the Ukrainian military's commander-in-chief Alexander Syrsky revealed two things. One, Russia had lost 31,700 of its soldiers in January alone. And two, Russian recruitment levels are nowhere near as high enough to replace that meat that Putin had fed into the grinder. These losses add to those experienced already during a 4-year war that has cost Russia over 1.2 million soldiers in 2025 alone. United 24 Media says Russia is estimated to have lost 415,000 soldiers, which amounts to an average of 35,000 casualties per month. It looks like Ukraine slowed down in January, but nothing could be further from the truth. The 415,000 soldiers figure relates to casualties, which include deaths, injuries, captures, and desertions. As for the 31,700 Russians eliminated in January, these are supposedly all deaths. Ukraine's drones were busy during the first month of the year, and every single one of these losses has been filmed by the drones that caused them, with that footage all being uploaded to Ukraine's Delta system, which enables verification. You don't need to be a maths whiz to see that 31,700 soldiers dead in January amounts to more than 1,000 losses per day, 1,022.6 if we're being precise. We throw in the 35,000 casualties per month seen in 2025. And the number, including other types of losses, is likely over 1,060. The other remarkable thing that Syrsky mentions is that Russia's loss rate is now so high that it's losing soldiers faster than it's able to replace them. January saw Russia deal with a 9,000 soldier shortfall on the recruiting front, which means that Ukraine has turned a major corner. It's going to keep on doing what it's doing. Only now what previously seemed like limitless supply of Russian manpower is starting to WN. Each time Ukraine eliminates more than Russia recruits, Putin's overall invading force is weakened substantially. So is Russia as a whole. You'll soon see why. Why doesn't Russia just recruit more soldiers then, you may ask? It's a logical question. The Kremlin has shown many times that it's willing to splash its cash to hire more cannon fodder for Putin's war. However, that approach is starting to fail, as many of those who were desperate enough to take that money have already been churned up, leaving Russia with a decreasing pool of potential soldiers to hire from. Not enough Russians are being induced to fight in Ukraine by the enormous payouts on offer, forcing Moscow's army to recruit a higher share of accused criminals, pressure conscripts into signing contracts once their mandatory service ends, and redeploy wounded soldiers. Financial Times reported on February 10th. And if Russia had been paying attention, it would have known that a recruitment crisis was looming. In 2025, Russia's new military recruitment figures had already dipped, the Moscow Times said in January. Not by much. Russia itself set a goal of 422,000 new soldiers, according to Putin's favorite mouthpiece, and it claims to have exceeded that goal by 704 people. But the quote was far lower than the 450,000 Medvedev claimed that Russia recruited in 2024, and hitting 422,000 was a result of Russian recruiters being forced into overdrive to pull the dregs that are now filling the battlefield in Ukraine. Adding to all of the deaths that Ukraine's drones are causing is a record-breaking desertion rate among Russia's soldiers. According to United 24 Media, 70,000 of Russia's soldiers were expected to abandon their units by the end of 2025. Little bit of math shows us that this is about a sixth of the total that Russia recruited for the year. And that is yet another problem that Putin faces. The Financial Times says that desertion rates in Russia are now at their highest point during the war, suggesting that the non-combatants and desperate people that Putin is press-ganging into the Russian military are waking up to the fact that big payouts don't mean much when you have an entire body full of drone shrapnel. Speaking of desperate people, that phrase pretty accurately describes the Putin cronies running around the Kremlin right now. They know that they have to keep the recruitment numbers up hook or by crook. Their glorious leader demands it, and they all know that there are a lot of windows in Moscow, out of which they could end up taking an unfortunate tumble if they don't give Putin what they want. So what we're now seeing in Russia is an increasingly frantic attempt to recruit people. And by people, we mean literally anybody who is still willing to take the big payday that Russia offers. The Financial Times already touched on this with its mentions of the criminals and the wounded. With over 1,000 of its soldiers dying daily, Russia's attempts to recruit are getting ever more drastic. ABC said back in January that Russia is freeing as many of its prisoners as it can, as long as those prisoners are happy to pick up a rifle and do their time in Ukraine to get out of serving sentences in the Russian jails. By January 2025, Russia had recruited 180,000 of its soldiers from its own penal system per the KE Independent, and the likelihood is that this number has easily rocketed past 200,000 in the year or so since. That seems like a good idea? Send people who are convicted murderers, rapists, and drug dealers into Ukraine, and you surely have the basis of a strong army, right? Sarcasm aside, even the prison system can't keep feeding Russia's recruitment treadmill forever. To overcome that, Russia is also turning to foreign fighters from anywhere that it can get them. ABC reports that an independent examination of Russian troop death revealed that over 550 of the 160,000 soldiers examined were foreigners from many different countries, showcasing that Russia is getting desperate enough to spend its money outside of its own territory just to keep the flow of soldiers coming in. Other recruitment efforts are more drastic, as ERR News reported. The Estonian Foreign Intelligence Service is stating on February 10th, volunteer numbers are dwindling, the service claims, which has led to Russia to subject those who can't be lured by payouts to intense pressure that includes deception, intimidation, psychological manipulation, and in some cases, brute physical force, all to get people who want to be as far away from Ukraine as possible to the front lines. Russia is now targeting socially vulnerable groups to pump up its numbers, including the chronically unemployed, those struggling with addictions, and people being suffocated by mounds of debt. Consequently, Russia's frontline units are largely composed of individuals who, under normal circumstances, should not be trusted with weapons, Estonia's Foreign Intelligence Service claims. Again, sounds like the foundation for a strong army, right? People who don't want to fight are being forced into a battle where their lives are over in a heartbeat due to Russia's rubbish tactics in Ukraine's strong defense of its territory. And make no mistake about it, the Kremlin knows how useless these supposed fighters are. It's not even bothering to properly train the cannon ephod that it's pulling into its military. As United 24 media revealed on February 10th, Russian military training lasts for less than 2 weeks. As Ivan, who is a Russian recruit who spoke to the outlet, revealed, after all the medical checkups, they asked me if I was ready to go to the military base the day after tomorrow. They trained us for 5 days. We waited for another 5 days for a force rotation, and then we went to combat positions. Ivan reveals, it's no wonder that Russia is losing over 1,000 soldiers per day. Now, the country's military training lasted up to 6 months before it was cut to 3 months in 2013. Russia's own laws state that its conscripts are supposed to undergo 4 months of training before they're deployed, which clearly isn't happening. Now, Russia is training its soldiers for about as long as it takes to make a decent sourdough starter, and those soldiers are lasting about as long in Ukraine as that lump of bread would. The veterans are gone. Almost anybody who actually wants to fight is gone. All that's left is the cannon fodder that Putin keeps on throwing against Ukraine's drones. By now, you're starting to see why Russia's military is failing so badly to make any sort of notable progress in Ukraine. But back at the start of the video, we told you that the war that Putin started is one from which Russia won't recover for 100 years. Why is that? Well, to answer that question, we need to go all the way back to the start of Putin's time as Russia's president. The former KGB agent was, well, not fresh-faced and DE'd, but perhaps not quite as aware of the demographic and population storms into which he was walking than he needed to be. As The Independent put it in October 2025, Putin has spent much of his time as president grappling with Russia's population problem when he isn't trying to wage war. He acknowledged the issue as far back as 2005 when he said that doing something about Russia's population problem was vital for the social and economic stability of Russia. He said something similar in 2019, noting that Russia was haunted by a population problem that Putin still hasn't solved. And in the same month that The Independent published its article, Putin had been banging the population drum again by emphasizing how raising Russia's birth rate was essential to the entire future of the country. Of course, he said all of this while about 1,000 potential fathers were dying in Ukraine daily. But Putin was never one to let his own poor decisions get in the way of good proclamation. None of the initiatives that Putin has implemented since coming to power has helped in the long term. Period of economic prosperity that Russia enjoyed during the early years of Putin's reign helped. Sure, the country's birth rate climbed from 1.21 million children per year in 1999 to 1.94 million in 2015, but it's plummeted again, declining annually since the peak. 2024 brought with it just 1.22 million births, placing Russia right back where it started when Putin came to power. And the country's population has been on a slow and steady decline since the collapse of the Soviet Union. In 1990, Russia had a population of 147.6 million. Now it's 146.1 million. And that's including the 2 million that Russia counts from its illegal annexation of Crimea. But what does this have to do with Russia not recovering for a century? Let's fast forward to 2100, a little over 100 years after Putin took power. Russia is being impacted more by a general global trend of people having fewer children than many other nations. According to the Institute for Human Sciences, the United Nations is anticipating that Russia's population will have dropped to between 74 million and 112 million from what it is now. In the world of tomorrow, Russia will be a territorial giant and a population dwarf. That is what Putin understands. Russia's population will not only be much smaller than that of China, India, or the United States, but also half that of Brazil and Ethiopia, and 1/3 that of Nigeria and Pakistan. The Institute says this is a problem that is a century in the making for Russia, and the country is a quarter of the way to getting there. Now, let's add a brutal and attritional war to this natural crisis. A war that has cost Russia over 1.22 million of its own people, almost all men already. A war that is still costing over 1,000 per day. A war that former Forbes contributor David Axe says could take Russia up until 2256 to win at the cost of 101 million souls if advances continue at the rate seen back in May 2025. What impact do you think that enormous loss of potential fathers will have on Russia in 100 years? It's far from a good impact on the population front, and Russia's declining population feeds into a lot of other issues that look set to wreck the country long after Putin breathes his final breath. As the Karyagi Endowment points out, Russia went through something pretty similar on the birth rate front during the collapse of the Soviet Union. However, the problems caused by low birth rates were mitigated by influxes of Russian-speaking citizens of the former Soviet republics that moved to the motherland from their former homes. Russia no longer has that get-out-of-jail-free car. Sure, people still immigrate to the country, but they aren't Russian speakers, and those potential immigrants now have more options. The endowment points to laborers from Central Asia, who once moved to Russia in massive numbers. There are now between 3 and 3.5 million of this particular demographic in Russia, when there was about double that number between 2012 and 13. Russia is in a catch-22 here as well. More immigrants from Asian territories results in the Russian sense of identity being chipped away. But when immigrants from other countries are leaving, as they've done in their millions over the past decade or so, Russia loses its labor, which causes massive economic problems. Russia was already running out of the people it needs to work at home. Losing over 1,000 soldiers a day in Ukraine only accelerates that process, feeding into a population crisis that has been a century in the making. We're already seeing an impact on Russia's economy that is directly caused by Putin's invasion. Speaking to Forbes in October, the associate director of the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center, Andrew Dieri, said, Russian men in their 30s are by far the largest casualty demographic on the Russian side. These are men who would soon be entering their prime salary earning years. Instead, the volunteer soldiers known as Contract Nikki have chosen the huge initial payouts offered by the government for fighting and dying in Ukraine. It's the dying part that matters. Every dead 30-some is a Russian who can't start a family or one who leaves a family behind. It all feeds into the massive population crisis that Russia already has. And things are only going to get much, much worse for Russia over the next 75 years or so. Russia has already burned through its skilled soldiers. Most of what the country sends into Ukraine is cannon fodder. Now, some of those that Russia has lost and continues to lose, and other skills. Some may have been engineers who could have helped Russia to develop its infrastructure. Others may have been semi-skilled laborers that Russia needs for factories that are only operating at 81% now and will continue to see declines as more of the talent pool and the money rise up. Putin's war isn't just killing over 1,000 soldiers per day. It's killing workers. It's killing husbands, fathers, careermen, moneymakers' minds, and everything else that a country needs to thrive well into the future. Sure, Russia as an entity will survive the next century probably, but it will do so having watched emerging global powers like China and India fly right past it, or for the sake of Putin's territorializing fantasies. It all comes down to a simple question. Who is going to rebuild in Russia? It isn't going to be the people that Putin is sacrificing for his own misguided ambitions. They won't be working, having kids, or doing anything that could save Russia from the fate that seems inevitable by 2100. It won't even be Putin, Russia's president, who is 73. And unless he intends for Russia to use an ever-rotating cast of body doubles to feign immortality, he isn't going to be around all that much longer. Let's bring things back to the battlefield. The reality is that the sheer scale of Russian deaths we're seeing now isn't going to get any better. Ukraine's defense ministry has set a target of 50,000 Russian soldiers killed per month, which would only exacerbate a recruitment crisis that is born from Russia no longer having as many people who are willing to fight for the Putin paycheck. Every one of those deaths will also contribute to Russia's population problem in the ways we've just described. Ukraine stands a good chance of hitting this target if what we see now on the battlefield is any indication. Russian offensives are already weakening. At its current pace, it will take Russia at least 2 more years to fully occupy the Donbass region for which it's fighting right now, per the Deep State UA monitoring project. That's 2 more years of constant death that, at a rough estimate based on what Russia has lost so far, will cost the country another 600,000 or so people. Probably more, given that Russia's large mechanized assaults are mostly a thing of the past. Russia ran out of armor before it ran out of people. It's using dismounted infantry to make minor gains with infiltration tactics that often result in yet more death now being the norm. When the so-called special military operation failed, Putin made a bet. If Russia applied enough pressure, Ukraine would crumble. That bet is now lost, says Michael Kaufman of the Karyagi Endowment. Putin's bet has been that sustained pressure across the board is going to eventually lead to a collapse on the Ukrainian side, but the way Russian forces are fighting simply won't generate operationally significant breakthroughs. Kaufman says, all we can ask now is how long will Putin keep all of this up? The longer the Ukraine war goes on, the worse Russia is going to look by the end of the century. If Putin keeps chasing after the failed bet, Russia might even get to its anticipated population a lot faster, spelling doom for its economy, its military, and its people. Putin's army is bleeding out. Russia itself is doing the same. Putin wanted an empire, and he's created a collapse. Economic strain, increasing desires for separatism, and vanishing geopolitical influence are all also contributing to the fall of Russia. You can find out more about how Putin has sealed his country's fate in our video. And if you want to see more, subscribe to The Military Show for your daily dose of Ukraine war analysis. And thank you for watching.